Welcome, everyone. So, I thought I would chat today a bit about the dark masculine. I've already covered the dark feminine in a previous video, kind of an introduction to the topic. And the dark masculine isn't talked about like it should be. It's a really important aspect of ourselves to get to know, to heal, and to understand. And I will share that no matter who you are, how you identify, we all carry darkness and light within ourselves, yin and yang, or we carry the dark feminine as well as the dark masculine, and the light feminine and the light masculine. And so, if we can come to a healthy place in all of those aspects of ourselves, darkness and light, we will come that much closer to self-realization or doing some very important healing and growth work on an individual level. So I will start by talking about the dark masculine and the way that it tends to appear in a wounded way. Then I will go into kind of the root woundedness or some of the deeper spiritual patterns, and then I will go into what a healed dark masculine looks like when we were truly in contact with it. So, in sort of everyday life, the wounding of the dark masculine is somebody that is all head and no heart. They have access to their mind. They believe that the only reality is sort of scientific materialism. They neglect and shut down their feelings, or they have no access to their feelings. And the only emotion that they tend to experience in this type of wounding is anger or frustration. No other emotions are really allowed. And this might present as somebody really looking down on emotions, such as saying, like things like, I like facts, not feelings, or, just kind of deriding others for being emotional when they pride themselves on being so logical. It can also present as somebody who is quite wounded. There are plenty of us who are incredibly feeling people, but due to our culture, we are taught that we should just stuff everything down and ignore it, that we cannot be vulnerable or express our feelings. And so this causes a lot of trauma and a lot of issues for many. And I will say that, in our wider culture, so kind of I'm speaking from sort of an American or Western perspective, although it could include many other cultures, religions, traditions as well, is that men are very much taught from an early age to shut down and to not express themselves, that it is not manly, it is not okay to express oneself. It's kind of the grit your teeth and get through it sort of mentality. And so when I'm talking about this, we can see it culture wide, but it in particular is an epidemic in men. It is in particular an epidemic for specific cultures who lack emotional intelligence or lack the ability to engage with their emotions or have just learned how to stuff everything down to move forward. As those of you who have followed my work for a while know, we can't just stuff everything down and move on with our lives. What happens when we do that is that it is continually in the background of our lives. And as Jung would say, we live it out as fate. in the outer world. We will continually come across people and situations that will remind us of what is untended to emotionally, energetically within. In a more kind of ordinary wounded masculine sort of way, the wounded masculine also presents as aggression and irritation, often at really small things, at really small inconveniences in life. Somebody cuts you off in traffic or steals your parking spot or, takes something off your desk, the immediate reaction is going to be one of irritation or anger. And so we should feel those things at kind of the minor inconveniences of life. But in this case, it is like the entire world is sort of set up to anger or irritate somebody who is really in their wounded masculine. Another way that, as we are going deeper, another way that the wounded masculine really presents is this shutdown of aggression. So we're talking about two halves, kind of the two different ways that things can present. And so somebody who may present as overly irritable, wanting to get in fights about really stupid things. That is one aspect, one type of wounded masculine. The other type of wounded masculine is somebody who has so shut themselves down, so detracted themselves from, alienated themselves is perhaps a better word, from healthy aggression that they cannot get into conflict. They cannot speak up what their needs are. They cannot engage in conflict. The idea of violence or aggression from other people will send them into a shutdown state or a freeze state or one of dissociation where they are not part of their bodies at all. Often this has to do with some type of trauma, but it can be as a result of prior violence as well. For example, we can think about people who have been in the military. In the United States, we have 4th of July where a lot of fireworks go off. That can be a really difficult time for people who have been in the military because it engages this sort of wounded masculine part of themselves that has not fully processed the sort of atrocities and difficulties and traumas that they have experienced prior. And so let's get to the really deep end of the pool, so to speak, of what the wounded masculine really, the experiences of it on a spiritual level. The experience of the wounded masculine on the deepest level is one of despair, of hopelessness, of kind of that hard edge of insanity, of psychosis, that sort of acting out, that paranoia, that sort of harshness that emerges. At its root, the wounded masculine feels completely and totally hopeless in a state of despair. It always sort of reminds me of Dante, and where the gates of hell read, "Abandon hope, all ye who enter here." It is a hopeless, dark space that somebody cannot see out of. It is a space of, at its root, alienation, feeling completely separate from everybody. But this separation is sort of like being in a dark room where it is so pitch black that not only can you not see other people, but you cannot see or acknowledge yourself either. It is a place energetically of annihilation. So, sort of the energy of a space, of a place where maybe a nuclear bomb went off. It is just completely desolate, completely alone, complete hopelessness. That is the root of the dark masculine, how it appears when that wound is incredibly deep. Essentially, on a spiritual level, this fear of annihilation tends to be present for a lot of people. On some level, a fear of death is sort of global. We will have to contend with and accept death in its many forms, with both the dark masculine as well as the dark feminine, as well as the lighter aspects of ourselves as well. But for the wounded dark masculine, this experience of annihilation isn't simply a fear of death. It is sort of a fear of being blown to bits. It is a fear of a violent lack of existence. And so I find that this annihilation energy is particularly present in people who have experienced extraordinarily difficult, traumatic early childhoods. And so basically, they were in a place where there was such a lack of safety, such a lack of certainty that they went into this sort of dark void, this space where they needed to contend with the annihilation of their being at way too early of an age. And so somebody who experiences this growing up will tend to be quite focused on the darker aspects of life, like, reading everything they can about death, or, being interested in shamanic work, being interested in, kind of the darker magics out there, being interested in, kind of those crime shows, or maybe even going into a field that has to do with that type of science or something like that. And so when we are looking at the really sort of violent aspects of this sort of dark masculine, it has a lot to do with annihilation energies. For example, we can consider two sort of masculine scenarios. The first is what is called a family annihilator. It is somebody, a male who not only kills himself, he also kills his family. And so by this, he is acting out that act of annihilation, that annihilation energy that he feels with and cannot connect with within, that he cannot make peace with or understand. The other, I live in the United States, so this is going to be more United States specific, but we have this history of young men who become school shooters or shoot up parades, shoot up, all of these varying places. And the purpose of that is enacting this annihilation experience that they feel and cannot contend with within. And they are in that place of hopelessness, alienation within themselves where they cannot see or reach out for support. They feel totally and utterly alone. And so they are acting out that inner expression of annihilation that they feel within. Coming up for air a bit, so coming from the deep end of the pool, kind of rising back to the surface. There is a deep wounded masculine in our culture because we no longer have the experience of initiation for young men anymore. This is a problem for all of us, again, no matter who we are and what our expression is. But in our modern culture, we may have religious services, like if you are, maybe you have a quinceañera, maybe you have a bar or bat mitzvah, maybe you have a sweet 16, whatever your thing is, maybe you have graduation from high school. And these are markers of a particular age, but they have lost their real spiritual value. And that spiritual value is for us to move from one phase of being, one stage of development to another. And so this dark masculine, the one of the deeper wounds that also expresses itself all the way through the dark masculine is this infantilization of men that happens in our culture, and where we may be a 30, 40, 50, 60, 70-year-old, but our dark masculine is still sort of stuck in development at particular ages. And so you can see this still in a lot of heterosexual relationships where the woman is taking care of everything and is exhausted, and the man still acts like a child. And if we were talking about this sort of stuff, if we were to really look at this pattern, is this stagnation in childhood really what the male wants? Some people may argue yes, particularly women who are in that type of relationship, or mothers who have sons and children that are kind of, like failure to launch sort of people. They are still living at home, still acting like a teenager, even though they might be in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, that sort of thing. But at the root of this sort of Peter Pan syndrome, I will mention as an aside that Peter Pan, that sort of archetype, has been very much sanitized over the years. Peter Pan did some pretty atrocious things in pretty unfortunate things in the original version of Barrie's work. But and that ties into going into archetypes of this sort of thing, because the Peter Pan syndrome is very much a part of the dark masculine, because there not only may be a refusal to grow up, a lack of desire to, but if we really look at where the fault is for that, it is because there is a stagnation in development, because this part of ourselves has never been given the appropriate tools, practices, and encouragement, such as having a mentor or a group, a proper father figure who could take us through all of the things that we need to know to be a proper functioning adult. And so again, I'm bringing this because it does, appear more with people who are men in this world. But so many of us have that Peter Pan syndrome, where we do not wish to grow up because that means extra responsibility, first of all. So that's one thing to contend with. But really, we look at our modern world where we have a culture where we no longer have these spiritual rites that will teach us and offer us meaning on a deep spiritual level about what it means to be a man, what it means to be a woman, what it means to be a functioning adult in our world. And so, as an antidote for this, I always suggest healing, because there's often a reason that parts of ourselves are stagnated in development. And that may mean not only healing whatever trauma or stresses there, kind of inner child work, but it also may mean on a spiritual level, um, getting some type of spiritual support, going to a spiritual worker to initiate that infant into toddlerhood, that toddler into adolescence, that adolescence into early adulthood, that adult, going into adulthood and then going into an elder sort of sage sort of state as well. All of those junctions are places where we tend to get stuck because we have not experienced a spiritual initiation into the next stage of development. So let's now talk about the healed masculine, the healed dark masculine, and what this looks like. I've already talked about Peter Pan. I will say that if all archetypes have kind of a wounded aspect to them as well as a healed aspect to them. So for Peter Pan, it is, I've already talked about the wounded aspect of it, but the healed aspect of it is connecting to our sense of play, connecting to our sense of discovery, connecting to our ability to create community, to feel and experience magic, to build things with our own hands, that sort of act of creation is very much a positive aspect of Peter Pan and is often very much what I suggest to people who are experiencing a wounded dark masculine is to figure out how to do things, how to do very simple things. It may be how to, build a birdhouse or how to fix very basic things in your home or apartment, how to have a functioning garden, how to change a tire, how to, I don't know, properly floss your teeth, whatever the skill set is. We now live in a world in which there is YouTube and there are varying channels that very much can teach us how to do things that we may have missed out on in terms of our development. How to balance a checkbook, or how to balance our finances, stuff like that. These can all be skills that so many of us have missed out on. And so engaging with those and, building what you can with your hands or fixing what you can with your hands tends to help with that initiation into adulthood, especially if it brings enjoyment. Um, there is a certain sort of satisfaction to fixing something and being like, oh, wow, I fixed this sort of thing. Another dark masculine archetype is the tyrant. And so the wounded aspect of this very much is people who are seeking power in an unjust way, people who are seeking power because they feel like a small child within, because they feel insecure and worthless within, because they do not have access to their own power. Um, People who have access to their own power, they don't need the power of other people. And what's more is that when we do have access to feeling, is that the ethics and the idea of taking power over another isn't something that we are going to do. For the tyrant to take power from others requires that shutdown, that wounded dark masculine that I'm talking about, where there is somebody who is devoid of empathy and really devoid of soul. It is interesting, I talk about reading energy quite a bit, like in my shamanic workbook series. I also talk about, looking at the eyes of somebody. And if you look at the eyes of the people who are really truly in power, whether it's the tech people or politicians or even celebrities, a lot of times what you will see is just this complete blankness, this complete shutdown, or you will see an incredible amount of shame, guilt. Essentially, you can look at their eyes, look at their energy, and sort of see that they are, a 2-year-old or a 6-year-old or maybe a teenager that is trying their best to operate in a 50, 60, 70, 80-year-old body. And so that very much is part of the wounded masculine is the tyrant energy, um, who has closed himself off so successfully that he is taking power from others, which just further depletes his own soul and his own access to his own feelings and any sense of goodness in his life. Somebody can be surrounded by jewels and riches and all the sorts of things that all of us may feel like we want and still have that annihilation energy within, still have that dark void within, that empty space where a soul was, and that person will very much feel that no matter how much they drink or try to drug or have sex or are on their super yacht, whatever is going on there. The next archetype I can talk about, if we were talking about, kind of the tyrant is one of those archetypes where you're like, if you talk about the healed tyrant, well, they're no longer going to be a tyrant anymore. So it does feed into the warrior archetype. Somebody who is a warrior archetype who is in the wounded masculine will feel as if they need to do everything themselves. They need to be the head of their family. They need to be doing and performing absolutely everything themselves. The part of this wounding is very much the sort of grind culture. I don't know if that's still a phrase, but that person who's very much part of the wounded masculine that feels like they need to go out and conquer all the time. They always need to be working. They always need to be doing. They always need to be performing. And so if we were to talk about the healed warrior archetype, it is somebody who can successfully engage with a healthy state of aggression in things like competition. They can successfully not only lead a group, but be part of a group where the cause or the culture is something that is much greater than themselves. So we can think about individuals who are healthfully being a part of things like sports teams or even in the military, where there is that sense of brotherhood, so to speak, or there's that sense of being a part of a group to accomplish something much greater than yourself. Getting in contact with our warrior lets us develop a certain type of resilience. It also allows for us to engage with healthy aggression, so being able to engage with conflict or even violence if we need to, as well as a sense of healthy aggression. Believe it or not, we need aggression. Healthy aggression lets us get into conflicts to stand up for ourselves, to speak up, to have a voice, to take action in a way where we really get to be our authentic selves in this world. Really letting ourselves go into the dark masculine warrior archetype can get us through so many of life's struggles, pains, sicknesses, because we really can go into the part of ourselves that, is totally and completely resilient and can fight when it needs to for a particular cause, either individually or collectively. The last archetype of the dark masculine I'm going to talk about is Pan, or we might consider it the wild man, the green man, very much going into our sort of animalistic, atavistic nature. And so, in a wounded dark masculine sort of way, this is the part of ourselves that, rapes, pillages, does violence, kind of the part of ourselves that can be quite psychotic, sociopathic, that seeks power over others. The healthy pan within us connects us to our basic instincts. When we are able to connect to our basic instincts, not only can we understand our bodies better, but we can connect to a healthy sense of sexuality, a healthy sense of sexual energy, where we can experience and feel passion for the world, um, passion for one another, passion for life. This is very much the part of us that, while the dark feminine connects to nature, the dark masculine very, very much connects to nature as well. You know, if we're connecting to, the trees and our own sort of wild twin, our own sort of inner wildness within, where we truly feel like we are a part of the natural world. Maybe we're hiking through a mountain or, hiking through a forest. That is that sense of things where we are able to react purely on instinct, purely from a sense of, our body directing us what to be, where to go, where we are. All of that very much has to do with a healthy dark masculine. And so many people are so far away from claiming these aspects of themselves, especially the sort of pan wild aspects of ourselves that very much are rooted in the other. If we are able to sit with our own inner pan, we become connected to the natural world, to our bodies, and especially to our sexuality in a way that not many people get to connect to. We are very much removed from our instincts, from our bodies, from our sort of pleasure principle. And so being able to explore these aspects in ourselves, and especially for a lot of people who are interested in spiritual work, they have completely shut these aspects of the dark masculine down. And so learning how to open those parts of themselves up safely and in a healthy way to engage with the dark masculine, with pan, with warrior, with the part of ourselves that really needs to come into adulthood, go through all those initiations, is a really beautiful thing to witness and to take part of.